So hello, my name's Ian Groves and it's my pleasure today to talk to you about Service Landscape Methodology, or SLM. So what is SLM? Well, SLM is a new approach to designing services which engages customers, suppliers through high impact visual analytics, and that's key for SLM. It drives a visual analysis. It's based on customer and resolver group engagement. It generates discussions around roles and responsibilities, but it also drives discussion around risk, governance and collaboration. It supports effective engagement with stakeholders to focus on business outcomes, and that's key. It's business outcomes and not IT outcomes. But it's built also upon its collective experience of its contributors. So SLM has been around now for a couple of years, and as part of that, its evolution has grown, it has changed, and we now have practitioners of the service landscape methodology across all regions within Fujitsu, and it's through their feedback and input that we continue to be able to develop and grow the practice of SLM. But one of the key things it does, it translates customer requirements into measurable outcomes within operations. And that's key for SLM. It's about identifying who's responsible in delivery for the service. So let's move on to talk about how it's different in terms of its collaborative approach. It's a powerful enabler because what it actually does is drive dialogue with customers. And that's important because we need to understand and validate current services as is. Now sometimes with Fujitsu we make the assumption that we know what as is. We'll take care of it during transition. And actually in reality we then have problems in transition because we've never really understood the true meaning of what the services are that we're taking over. So SLM allows us to validate customer requirements, also clarifying the services to be retained by the customer. And again, this is an important dynamic for SLM. We recognise that the customer has responsibilities in delivery, but sometimes we forget that. And also clarifying the role of the customer's third parties. And by that we mean parties that the customer has contracts with in delivery, but not Fujitsu. So again, we may not be managing that third party, but we will have an interaction and an interface to that party to deliver the service. Internally, it also helps us to drive dialogue with our delivery teams. And that's about gaining clear understanding again of roles and responsibilities. It eliminates gaps in the end-to-end model, but also importantly, it allows us to make sure that all service management processes are clearly identified, in place and connected. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward in the presentation. So let's now start to think about the true terms within SLM. And the first one we talk about is the level 0, which we call the service outline. And I make no apology really for the fact we've gone to use a graphical and a diagram representation here, because really SLM is all about visual analytics. It's about the power of visualization of the diagrams, and therefore we think this is a great way to demonstrate how SLM works. So let's go forward. So the level 0, what it does, it gives us a complete solution shown as a series of service domains. Okay, and it also allows us to understand what we call the scope of the service integrator. Now the service integrator could be Fujitsu, it could be the customer, or it could be a third party. But in the world of SIAM, service and integration and management, it's clear and it's of paramount importance that you define the role of the service integrator. It allows us to capture the customer third-party suppliers, but it also identifies all of the groups within the customer's own organisation that are responsible for service in delivery. And that's something we don't tend to do very well within Fujitsu. And the benefits of that is we are able to identify all service providers and the services that they provide. We're able to produce a complete overview for the customer and the customer third-party teams. But again, it establishes the foundation of taking control over the delivery of service, if you like, a true SIAM framework. So let's go on to just dig a little bit deeper now, and then we talk about the level 1 service baseline. And the service baseline is where we start to go underneath the waterline, if you like, to really understand how services are delivered in operations and the processes required to make those operations perform effectively. So we take each of those individual domains that we identified at level 0, and from there we start to break them down into their discrete service functions. And we say that a service function also contains service components, and each of those components is associated to a service function. And then in a component, we have a set of service activities that are required to deliver that component. And a service activity is, in a sense, an operational task. It's something that somebody in operations needs to deliver, whether that be Fujitsu, the customer, or a customer third party. And the value of doing that and the benefits of that is we're able to also identify all of the clearly defined activities. It allows us to develop a framework from which we then build the service delivery organization, because once we have the activities, we need to know who is going to be responsible for the delivery of those. And it allows us to produce simple, graphical and transparent visualizations. And this is one of the key unique factors of SLM. It allows us to take operational data, put it through our service landscape generator application, and produce strong and powerful visual diagrams of that. Diagrams which are not only important to Fujitsu, but also a great way to engage our customers to understand how SLM works and the value that they see within SLM. So let's go a little bit deeper. Let's go further into a domain. And again, as I said, we have service functions. So in this analogy, we've taken the blacksmith, you'll have seen from our diagram before, and we're starting to understand the services and how the services are structured that blacksmith is responsible for. So you can see the service functions. We then have a number of service components underneath those. And then, of course, somebody somewhere has to do some operational tasks to make all of those things happen. And this is how the power of SLM. We take a very simple 3-layered structure to get down to the operational level of detail. And that allows us then to get a complete decomposition of all of those service domains, and we capture them. And again, remember, this is about taking the customer's solution and mapping that to specific server requirements. So it's translation of what we've said we'll provide into a real clearly defined operational set of terms of reference and requirements. And the benefits of that are clear. We're able to clearly define the operational accountability, the scope of the accountability. We get clear end-to-end tasks, so we're able to measure performance and manage the performance of individual suppliers down the chain and back the ways again. But it also allows us to create strong frameworks to build the service delivery organization. And I'll come to that in the next set of slides. But again, it's the power of having simple, transparent but powerful graphic representations of the services. So let's take it a little bit further. When we talk about service, we talk about the service ecosystem. Now, typically in Fujitsu, we tend to think, and again, we're the same as most suppliers, we tend to think about ourselves only as being part of the service delivery organization. But what SLM does, and what SIAM is trying to do here, is identify the role of all parties, including the customer and customer third party. And collectively together with Fujitsu, that is the true service delivery organization. And this diagram here is showing that we take a service delivery organization, but then we break it down into a number of discrete service delivery units. So for Fujitsu as an example, our GDCs would represent a service delivery unit. Then within a unit, we identify the actual resolver groups and the teams responsible for those activities within operations, and we map those to the service components. And then we have agreement on the activities required for each of those resolver groups. And this is key. This is a thing that we often find within transitions or within service design. We tend to stop short of really describing what has to be delivered in operations, where SLM plugs that gap. It really builds a picture of who is responsible, and then there is no question, there is no doubt as to who's responsible in delivery. And that comes through in the benefits. So we have an open and transparent ecosystem, and by that I also mean that we have transparency with our customers. We're not trying to hide away from our responsibility. It also details the responsibility of their third parties. So it really is the true embodiment of SIAM, where collaboration is key for the success of a true SIAM implementation. It enables service integration. As I said, it drives collaboration. But the key thing here, it does really ensure a shared focus on the customer's business outcomes. It's not just us trying to deliver value. And that's important to customers, and it's important in the sense that it allows us to be successful when we're going through a renewal process or winning new business. Many customers have already noted that SLM is unique to us, and it really enables us to have a good conversation around the end solution, which they trust. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation about the processes, and we have within SLM something we call the process.matrix. Again, it's very simple, but sometimes quite difficult in reality to execute. But what I want to show you here is that we use a very simple approach where we identify, first of all the processes that are required. We then have to make sure that we understand which resolve groups have a connection to those processes. And then finally, we identify where those touch points are to the processes. And it's important to identify those touch points because it's about understanding where a process touches a resolve group. We need to know what's required to make that process operate. And unless you have that, you can't have a true end-to-end delivery of service. So the benefits of that are about ensuring that we have that alignment, and we're also then all talking the same language because we don't really concern ourselves as to whose process it is. What's important is the interaction between providers at a touch point where that process is in place. It truly enables end-to-end control for the service integrator, so it allows us to take that SIAM responsibility. But the key thing here, it really does drive collaboration between service providers. There's no longer the finger pointing that goes on about there was not clarity as to who was responsible for what within operations. And finally, when you have all of this in place, of course you're able to drive operational efficiencies. One of the key success factors for SLM is to identify areas of duplication. Sometimes there are gaps in the end-to-end service model, but it allows a singular view of where responsibility lies, and it really does. You know, we can see cost savings of 30% in terms of cost. You can reduce the number of delivery groups because we often see replication, etc., etc. But it is about driving that clarity, which allows you to make decisions based on that. So the question is, does SLM work? Well, of course, I'll say yes, but we do have a number of anecdotes here where it's really helped us. So on the Specsavers deal, it was a case of here is, again, it was about the first time they'd really understand the service we were offering. It was the clarity that SLM brings. On Southern Water, again, an anecdote, wish we'd had this earlier, which is really powerful for us. But one of the key ones, I think, for us, and it's our best standing one to date, really, is around the Port of Rotterdam. Why this, the SLM was the key reason that they chose Fujitsu ahead of the competition. And finally, I just want to show you some benefits of actually deploying Service Landscape directly for our customers. So Service Landscape methodology originally was designed to be an internal approach to service design, service integration, and visual analytics. But the more we've used it, the more customers have seen it, the more we can see a relevance to directly work with our customers to apply SLM into their own environments. And what that allows us to do, or the customer to do, is get a really good understanding of their own internal organization. There's a trend lately for customers start to insource services back, where previously they've had long-standing outsourced relationships with suppliers. They're bringing some of that service back in. We've seen service desks coming back in-house, etc. And this allows them to get a clear understanding of their own responsibility in delivery within their own organisation. It also allows them to understand the impact of change. If you look at the landscape, if something is going to change, you can already start to see where the impact and ripple effect of that will be within their own organisation. And finally, it allows them also to take advantage of the digital technologies that are coming forward. It allows them to assess the value to their own organisation, but also to assess the impact of change. And it's a powerful enabler for customers to move forward as they embrace the digital era. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this presentation on Service Landscape.